Welcome back to another class on the treasures of Mishnayot. We are in Mishnayot of Berachot, Perek Vav, Mishnah Hey. This will be part 1 of the Shi'ur, as the introduction is pretty long. The Kahati begins, Mishnatenu oseka behilchot su'uda u'berchotecha. Our Mishnah is going to be dealing with the laws of the meal and its blessings. Ikar kiviyut su'uda hu kiragil alapat. The main establishment of a meal is as usual on bread. Now I want to try to explain something before we continue. Back then, a person's main meal was the bread. Today, a person's main meal is everything but the bread. So that's why we're beginning the Mishnah like this. The main establishing of a meal is on bread. That we bless on it in the beginning of the meal, the blessing of hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And with this blessing, we're going to exempt everything that's going to be eaten with the bread. Now this is very important. Since the main establishing of a meal is on the bread, and on the bread, in the beginning of the meal, we're going to bless hamotzi lechem min haaretz. With this blessing of hamotzi lechem min haaretz, we exempt everything that is eaten with the bread. Now this is very important. Again, back then, whatever they ate in order to make the bread taste better. Today, we don't have that problem. Today, Baruch Hashem, we eat a little bit bread, and everything is the main course, the side dishes, but not the bread. Again, back then, the main thing was the bread, and everything that came for the bread. That's what we're beginning to over here, that once you had established a meal which is on bread, you're going to bless hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and with this blessing, you're going to exempt everything that is eaten with the bread, because they become secondary to the bread. And so too, and so too all other types of food which come because of the meal, again, because of the bread, during the meal, even you're going to eat them without the bread, you're not going to need to go ahead and say the blessing of hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So let's see over here. So too other foods which come in the middle of the meal, but for the meal. For example, a person wants to have fish. That fish is coming for the sake of the meal. Meat, as we'll see. Right? So if it's coming for the meal, even if you eat it without bread, you are exempt from saying blessings on them. For example, vegetables, fish, cheese, eggs, meat, and other cooked dishes, etc. All of these things, as we'll see, you don't have to bless on them separate berachot. They all become exempt by when you have blessed hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So we see over here two things. Foods that are going to be eaten with the bread don't require blessings. Foods which come in the middle of the meal, meaning in the middle of your bread meal, since these foods are coming for the meal, even if you're going to eat it without bread, we're going to tell you the blessing of hamotzi lechem min haaretz exempts those meals, exempts those foods. All right, so one more time. And so too, and so to other types of food which come because of the meal, during the meal, even though you are eating them without bread. For example, kigon, yerakot, vegetables. For example, you have vegetables, gavina, cheese, beitim, eggs, dagim, fish, basar, meat, and all types of cooked dishes, etc. and similar things to the cooked dishes. Comes out over here that whenever basically you have a food which is eaten with the bread, or even eaten without the bread, but it came for the meal and you're doing the meal, you never have to say any blessing on them. You allow one blessing of Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz to do the job. Continues the Kahati, and he says, Aval, however, here we go, very important. Devarim Abaim Shalom Machmat Asuda, things that come not because of the meal. Kigon Pirot, for example, fruits. She'en Regelim Lalavet Bahem Et Apat, that we're not accustomed to accompany them with the bread. Ve'av en mishamshim kimanat mazon lesova. We don't even use the fruit as a portion of a food for satiation. Ela ba'im em lerov l'shem kinuch suda. Majority of the times, fruits, they come usually as dessert. Einam niftarim beberkat apat. They do not become exempt with the blessing of the bread. Ela rather teunim hem bracha hamyuchadim lahem. Each one is required the blessing which is designated for it. So let's go over here now. However, things that don't come because of the meal, for example, fruits, are not exempted with the bread, but require their own blessing. We'll see now also so too by wine. Now, Rabotai, I want to explain something over here very important before we do continue. Let's say I sat down right now to eat bread with grapes. Right? So you see clearly you have bread, where I bless Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, and now I'm eating grapes, which is a fruit. Do I bless a separate blessing on them? In this situation, no. Why? Because when I sat down to eat the bread, I wanted to eat the bread with the grapes. What we're speaking about right over here is like this. A person that sits down to have a bread meal and has other salads and food and cooked dishes and so on and so forth, and now towards the end of the meal, they bring him out grapes. Are we going to say that these grapes are part of the meal? No, that we're not going to say. Why? Because you see clearly you have other types of foods that you are eating as part of your meal, and grapes are not part of the meal. In general, when fruits come, they come majority of the times for dessert. But if you wanted to make the grape your meal with the bread, you would not have to bless Borei Pri Ha'etz on the grape, since Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz exempted it. So that's what he's telling us over here. Aval, however, Devarim Abaim Shalom Machmat Asuda, things that come not because of the meal. Kigon, for example, Perot, fruits. She'enam Regelim Lalevet Bahem Et Apat, because a person is not accustomed to using the fruits to accompany the bread. For example, if a person wants to eat hummus, tahina, tuna salad, egg salad, anything like that, that comes to accompany the bread. Fruits, they don't usually come to accompany the bread unless you make that an exception. They're not even used as a portion of a food for satiation. You never see people go ahead and now sit down and take grapes alone and eat that as a meal. Rather, majority of the time, they come as a dessert. So therefore, we're going to tell you, they're not exempted with the blessing of Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. Each food is going to be required to say the blessing that is proper for them. And so too when it comes to drinking wine, here we go. So too when it comes by wine, when it comes to drinking wine during the meal, even though the wine does come because of the meal. Because when a person drinks wine, it opens up his appetite. But remember, when did you start drinking this wine? During the meal, not before the meal, during the meal. So that wine allows you to have more room in your stomach to eat more foods. He says one more time, and so to one who drinks wine during the meal, even though the wine comes because of the meal. Like I explained, it opens up one's appetite. Very important. The blessing of bread does not exempt it. And you need to bless on it its proper blessing, which is Borei Pri HaGefen. Why? Because the wine causes a blessing for itself. שבכמה מקומות הוא בא ומברכין עליו. What does that mean that the blessing, what does it mean that the wine causes the blessing for itself? So he said, because in many places we bless on it even though we don't have to. Even though we didn't have to drink the wine, still we bless on it. How? Kigon be kiddush, for example, kiddush. When a person does kiddush, not necessarily does he have to use wine, but it comes by itself. So therefore we're going to go ahead and we're going to bless on it. What about when a person does erusin? When we do the kiddushin process, we have a cup of wine. You could have done it without it, but we do it with wine. So we see clearly over here that wine, it comes by itself, so therefore it causes its own blessing. He brings this down in the name of the Rashi, V'tosot in Masay Berchot, Dav Ben Bet, Amr Aleph. All right, so let's just do this one more time. And so to one who drinks wine during the meal, even though the wine comes because of the meal, like I explained, because wine opens up a person's appetite. The blessing of the bread of Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz does not exempt the wine. You need to bless on it borei Perek Gefen, because the wine, it causes its own blessing. Why? Because in many places the wine comes and we bless on it. Even though we did not need to go ahead and drink the wine. For example, bikiddush or b'berkat erusin, like for example, if a person does kiddush on Shabbat, or by the kiddush when a person is getting married. In all of these places, not necessarily do you need the wine, but nevertheless, the wine comes and it requires a blessing for itself. That's why it's so over here. So too by wine. When you're having wine in the middle of a meal, even though it opens up your appetite and it's part of the meal and it comes for the meal, nevertheless, I'm going to tell you that Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz does not exempt the wine, but rather you have to bless its own blessing of borei Perek Gefen. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next piece. However, up to now, what do we just learn? That wine during the meal, Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz does not exempt it. However, wine before the meal will exempt it. Here we go. However, if somebody drank wine before the meal, and he blessed on it, the blessing of borei Perek Gefen, very important, and he's accustomed to drinking wine also during the meal, you do not need to bless on the wine that's in the middle of the meal. Why? Because it was already exempted of the blessing of the wine before the meal. So here we go. One who drank wine before the meal, and this is very important about Thai, and it's a custom. I'm talking about this is going on a regular day right now. One who drank wine before the meal and is accustomed to drink wine during the meal, because if you're not accustomed, you might not have had your mind on it, and you're going to go ahead and you have to bless another blessing. That's what you're saying, accustomed. So when a person drinks and if he's accustomed, it's as if he had open kavanah even on the wine during the meal. One who drank wine before the meal and is accustomed to drink wine during the meal, the wine during the meal requires no blessings. Why doesn't it require the blessing of borei Perek Gefen? Because when you drink wine before the meal and you said borei Perek Gefen, that borei Perek Gefen is going to exempt the wine during the meal. So one more time. One who drank wine before the meal, and he blessed on it, and he's also accustomed to drinking wine during the meal, you do not need to bless on the wine that you're going to drink during the meal. לפי שכבר נפטר בברכת היין שלפני הסעודה, because you already exempted the blessing of the wine that you had blessed before the meal on or for the wine that you're going to have during the meal. וכן יין של קידוש בשבת ובחג פותר את היין שבתוך הסעודה. And so too, when a person does kiddush on wine on Shabbat or on the holidays, that too is also going to exempt him what he's going to have during the meal. So like this. So too by kiddush or the holidays. For example, Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, which are Yom Tov. If you're going to go ahead right now and you're going to do kiddush on Shabbat or on Yom Tov or on Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, over there we're going to tell you that the wine before the meal will exempt the wine during the meal, since the wine before the meal is part of the meal. Rabotai, we did go over all of these cases in the previous classes. Okay. So that's what he says, וכן יין של קידוש בשבת ובחג פותר את היין שבתוך הסעודה. And that's why wine, the kiddush wine of Shabbat and the kiddush wine of the holiday is going to exempt the wine during the meal. Now comes the Kahati and he's going to say something now. Now we're going to move on over here, where what we're about to learn now, it doesn't necessarily apply to us, as we'll see. Up to here, everything applies to us. From here and on, it does not apply to us. Mishnatenu dana biyain sheshotim la'achar hasuda. Our Mishnah is going to go ahead and is going to judge a case where a person is going to drink wine. Excuse me, where a person is going to drink wine after the meal. Kodem birkat hamazon. So this is what we want to see. Our Mishnah will speak about wine after the meal, but before birkat hamazon. All right, it's very important. You have completely finished eating your meal. Now, back then, what they used to do was, when they used to have a meal, they would clean everything out and they would have like almost a wine party. And they would have other delicacies that they would bring and they would eat, other appetizers, as we'll see right now. So he says like this. Mishnatenu dana, our Mishnah is going to judge biyain sheshutim la'achar hasuda, with wine that a person is going to drink after the meal, kodem birkat hamazon, but before birkat hamazon. V'chen beparperot, and so too by appetizers. Shochlim la'achar hasuda. That's what our Mishnah is going to judge. It's going to judge with wine after the meal and appetizers after the meal. Shekenu hagim hayu b'yimehem, because this is what they were accustomed in their days. Shela'achar hasuda, that after the meal, lifnei birkat hamazon, but before they would bless birkat hamazon, hayu moshichim yidehem min hapat, they would pull back their hands from bread. V'kuvi'im atzmam l'shtot yain, and they would establish themselves to drink wine. V'lechol parperot shonot, and they would eat different appetizers. V'halachahi, and the halacha is shadvarim aba'im la'achar hasuda, things that come after the meal. Hainu, what does that mean after the meal? La'achar shemashchu yidehem min hapat, after they had removed their hands from the bread, meaning they no longer wanted to eat bread. Tzrichim bracha lifnehem, they would need to go ahead and bless the proper blessings on what they're about to eat. She'en birkat hapat petoratan, because the blessing of bread is not going to exempt the wine after the meal and the appetizer after the meal. Amnam, however, din ze shel achar suda eno noheg etzleinu. This halacha of achar hasuda, after the meal, we don't have that custom today. She'en anu reglin l'mshoch yedenu min hapat ad achar birkat hamazon, because we don't remove our hands from the bread until after birkat hamazon. V'lachen, therefore, nechshav etzleinu tamid kimo betoch hasuda. Therefore, by us, it's always considered to be that we're in the middle of the meal. He brings it down the name of the Tosfot. So therefore it comes out that for us, nowadays, since it looks as if we are always in the middle of the meal, so even if you're going to go ahead and you're going to want to have wine or appetizers after the meal, before Birkat Hamazon, you don't have to bless blessings on them. Like we explained that if you bless, for example, Brei Pri Hagefen prior to it, and now you're accustomed, so you went ahead and you drank wine during the meal, you didn't have to say a bracha. In their days, now when they would want to drink wine after the meal, they would have to say another blessing, B'rei Pergefen. Today, since you're already blessed on the wine before the meal, you don't have to bless on the wine after the meal before Birkat Hamazon. And so too by the appetizers. By them, let's say they wanted to eat jerky or fish or meat or something like that, they would have to go ahead and bless. By us, we don't have to bless it. Why? Because the blessing of Hamosh Lech Min Haaretz covers that. Until we don't say Birkat Hamazon, we are always considered to be in the middle of the meal. Nevertheless, nevertheless, our Mishnah is going to speak about, but then we'll see in the following class, the minhag that was in their days, like we explained above.